We left a good trail of breadcrumbs. It's good. Well, we're just getting started, and I wanted to say we'll have time at the end for questions and talking, but first we're going to have a presentation, and I'm going to be doing that. The first thing I need to say is to let you all know that we're recording this, so if anybody doesn't want to be seen, because we will likely post it, then I hope you know what to do to make yourself anonymous. And you can put questions in the chat if you don't want to ask them yourself at the end, and Holly's going to read any questions that people put in the chat. Okay. I think the thing I want to say to begin is welcome and thank you for being here. We just picked a name for our group, so this is our first official use of our name, which is Quit Carbon NC. And the talk today is really about telling you what we're about, and then beginning with some explaining about why we're doing what we're doing the way we're doing it, to give context. This won't be new information to you all, but we feel like it's important to have this as a shared framework before we start talking about what we're going to do to address it. So the first 25 minutes or so are going to be that kind of background information, and then another 20 minutes with talking about what we're here to do and to invite you all to do with us. So that is the plan. We begin with the words of Sir David King. I invite you all to read these. At this point, all but the fringiest of scientists agree that we're in a climate emergency. Everyone from the United Nations to the International Monetary Fund to the National Weather Bureau is telling us the situation is dire. The climate crisis doesn't care who you voted for. This isn't politics, it's physics. Earlier this year, Sir David King made the statement that you read there on the slide. I think it's not hard to intellectually get what he's saying. It's something happening that we need to know about. Okay. Yeah, it's not hard to get it intellectually. The challenge here is emotional. The feelings that are stirred as we realize that human beings have really brought us to the threshold of catastrophe, if not beyond it, by things we've done. So what do we do with all these feelings? What do we do with the pain, the fear, the anger, really the grief that just won't quit? It's a process, but it's not just what do we do with all of that in a moment of realization. It's what we do with these feelings really for the rest of our lives. So I think here in the beginning, I want to say one thing is continues to be very important for me is finding ways to bring compassion, which I think of as being love in the face of suffering for ourselves and for everybody in this terribly sad boat with us. So, when we realize really there are no words. There are no words that can make what we've lost and what we're sure to be losing any less painful, any less wrong. Nothing to say. At this point, the time for words is really past, I think. And it's time to be looking at what we can do. And there are things that we can do. And the good news is there are others who will take those actions with us. Can be a lot of comfort in that for me. That's why we're here today. not because we need to hear another talk about how bad things are. We know that. We're here to find the people who will act with us. We're not here because we need yet another environmental group, but because we need a way to act together that has a chance of bringing an immediate, uncompromising stop to the death march that we're on as a species. Going by results, climate activism over the past 30 years has completely failed. And I don't mean to be harsh about that. I include myself in all of the good-hearted, hard-trying, hard-working people who have done things that have had positive effects, not meaning to deny that or minimize that. It's just that every year of marching and educating and campaigning and protesting, signing petitions and making donations, we've all done all of this, most of us. Every year that we've done these things has been a year when carbon emissions have gone up 60% since 1990. We have 3 to 4 years to make radical changes. Experience tells us that more of the same has a 0% chance of doing that. We are ready to try something different, and we'll get into that in the second half of the talk. This talk has 4 main points. Things are very bad. No one is coming to save us. Together we can save ourselves, and you are needed. James Baldwin wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." This is the facing it part of the talk. A couple of 100 years ago, people got it figured out that they could create energy by burning things like coal, oil, and gas, the fossil fuels. And it turns out that the gases that come from burning fossil fuels don't just float off into space, never to bother anybody again. They build up in the atmosphere and trap warmth from the sun, like a greenhouse. So that slowly but surely the Earth has gotten warmer, much warmer. Here's a fact. The actions of people, chiefly the burning of fossil fuels, have raised the global temperature since the beginning of the industrial era by 1.2 degrees, give or take, Celsius. So why should we care? Why should this mean anything to us? Well, this warming of 1.2 degrees Celsius matters because in 2015, at a United Nations-sponsored conference in Paris, COP21, representatives from most of the countries in the world looked at recommendations from the world's top scientists and agreed that it was necessary, and that's their word, necessary. And to hear that, necessary, to keep the rise in average global temperature from going above 1.5 degrees Celsius. The representatives at that conference signed an agreement pledging to lower their greenhouse gas emission. 6 years later, in November of just this past year, when COP26 met in Glasgow, not one single country had kept their Paris commitment. An article in the New York Times summed up the results of COP26 this way. And by the way, COP26, you should know, means just what it sounds like. The meeting this past November was the 26th time since 1995 that governments have met to try to halt warming, with the Earth getting hotter every year. So quoting now from the New York Times, even if countries fulfill all the emissions promises they have made, they still put the world on a dangerous path toward a planet that will be warmer by some 2.4 degrees Celsius by year 2100 compared to pre-industrial times. So I put this quote, and there's a part two. I'm going to stop here with part one. I put it on a slide because I wanted to break it down, that there's so much behind these words that the words themselves can start to just be kind of flat and meaningless. And the first thing I wanted to clarify is that we're talking here about this 2.4 degree rise in what they're calling average global temperature. That means the temperature for the whole globe, the average temperature over the whole globe, includes the oceans, includes the poles. What really is going to affect people is what the temperature is going to look like for the parts of the earth where people live, right? So a 2.4 degree rise in average global temperature means a 7.5 degree average temperature rise for the parts of the globe where the most people live. For us, taking this from Celsius to Fahrenheit, so it'll mean something for most of us, this would mean that a hot summer day of 95 degrees Fahrenheit, which we see plenty of, would reach over 108 degrees. And that's without considering the effects of humidity. Okay, these temperatures put us in territory where human bodies die from the heat. Crops won't grow. The estimate is that at that point about, okay, get ready for some big unreal numbers. At that point, about 1,000 million people will no longer be able to live where they are. So what does that mean in real life? We can look at the recent example of what happened in Syria, where 5 million people were internally displaced and 500,000 people died. So applying that same proportion with 1,000 million people displaced, we can expect something in the ballpark of 100 million people to die. Let's take a minute to try to make that a real imagined possibility. So going to the second part of the Times quote, Times goes on to say that warming of 2.4 degrees Celsius misses by a wide margin the target of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees that scientists say is necessary. There's that word again, necessary, to avert the worst consequences of warming. And it sets the stage for worsening storms, wildfires, droughts, and sea level rise, as well as the social and economic upheaval that would accompany a widening climate crisis. So I don't know about you all, but to me, this language is just weirdly alienating. It's like I'm reading it. I know I'm reading something meaningful, but especially reading it out loud, it starts to feel so distant, these words. And so I looked more closely and broke down, looking at what's really being said here. So first of all, the failure of governments to keep warming below 1.5 degrees does not just set the stage for ever more deadly storms, fires, droughts, and sea level rise. It causes them. Ultimately, the worst consequences of warming, which sounds benign in its vagueness, are quite possibly the deaths of most, if not all people, as well as much of the other life on Earth. And let's be clear, social and economic upheaval is a cooled down way of saying social collapse. The systems that make society work don't function anymore. And we're already seeing those kind of effects from the relatively minor, compared to climate catastrophe, problem of COVID. So, social collapse means, empty shelves in the grocery store. It means the Amazon trucks don't come anymore. No job, no social security, no home, hunger, famine, death, war, the rape that always comes with war. We know this. We need to say this because we know that. Thirst, dehydration, bodies dropping in the dirt. The New York Times, with using these kind of euphemisms, can both tell us the truth and lie to us at the same time. And I think this happens all the time. I think it's, in my opinion, it's just, I haven't done any research, but when we end up feeling so kind of befuddled and lost in the midst of it all, partly, I think, because we're not just saying plain what we're talking about. So, and finally, the other thing I have to mention is this quote. It speaks of the social and economic upheaval that would accompany a widening climate crisis, totally erasing with one word, would, the hundreds of thousands of people who are already suffering and dying as a result of the widening climate crisis now. I'm going to put out a bit more information to clarify how bad things are and why scientists seem to be so worried when, for many of us in the global north at least, things don't seem all that bad yet. It's not just that the Earth is warming at a doomsday rate, which last year had a hurricane from the Gulf of Mexico drowning people in New York City basement apartments. It's not just that the amount of warming is sure to increase, because governments are not able or willing to do enough to stop it. Things are worse than that in part because of feedbacks, like the melting of the Arctic ice, of the permafrost, the burning of the Amazon. These kind of feedbacks are certain, and certain is the scientist's word here, they're certain to increase the rate of warming even more over the coming decades. And then from there, things threaten to get worse, much worse, because life on Earth operates as a system. And that means that what happens in one part of the system affects what happens in other parts of the system. It's a regular thing. It's like with plumbing, right? If the kitchen sink is stopped up and you don't fix it, then the next thing you know, there's water backing up in the bathtub every time you flush the toilet. That's and when the ice melts at the Arctic, the effects don't stop at drowning the small island nation. The northern jet stream and the Gulf Stream are two of the major forces that keep weather patterns stable, and both have already become disrupted by the warming at the poles, and are sure to be, and again, scientists' words, sure to be further disrupted as warming increases. These kind of changes affect people's ability to grow food. Okay, you have to have a stable climate in order to, make growing food work. And then we're back to the major social and economic disruption here. But it's worse than that. Scientists have trouble sleeping at night because they know about other things that most people don't understand. Two of these things, carbon lag and the heating of the oceans, mean that even if we hit zero emissions tomorrow, the Earth will continue to warm because of what we've already done. So carbon lag just refers to the time delay between putting carbon into the air and the point when the additional carbon emissions actually raise the temperature on Earth. This can take anything from 5 to 20 years. So we haven't felt the effects of the carbon that we're putting into the air now. And finally, there's the fact that so far, most of this one really gets me. I have to take a breath, actually. So far, and this is the fact, most of the effects of warming have been stored in the oceans. So whatever we're experiencing on land, it's going on even more in the ocean. 93% of the heat produced by carbon emissions since 1990 was absorbed there. It's mind-blowing to me to think about what this means for life in the oceans. And there's no telling how long they will continue absorbing before the oceans can no longer hold the heat and begin to release it. And then look, we're back at the major social and economic disruptions, which is code for social collapse, which is a more comfortable way of saying hundreds of millions of people suffering in a world where only the strongest survive. That's what we're looking at. We would like to think that people will treat each other well in hard times, but it's difficult to expect that, considering the fact that in the 60 years between 1956 and 2016, a total of 43 genocides took place, causing the deaths of about 50 million people. We really want to do everything we can to avoid social collapse, folks. The best information we have tells us that in order for us to have a fair chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, global emissions would have to go down 40% by 2030. In fact, the latest analysis is that they're going to go up 16% by 2030. And then taking another breath to make room. It's also important to know something we already know, but to know it more deeply. That the problem of climate catastrophe isn't just the problem of climate catastrophe, right? The same powerful political and economic interests that caused and perpetuate the climate crisis are destroying the Earth's living systems in other ways as well. Everything from pesticides to plastics exists because someone is making a lot of money off of it. The violence and greed that assaults the planet also robs and kills the people who live here, especially the most vulnerable among us. The climate crisis is already climate catastrophe for many parts of the global South and for the poor in the North. Black and brown people, Indigenous people, women, children, and old people, and anyone who gets in the way of somebody who has some power in their drive to make money gets hit first and gets hit hardest. Okay, so that was a lot of facing it. It's hard, right? It's hard to face these realities, hard to live with what we know. Is this maybe a good time to check in with the body? And for me, kind of a sick feeling in my stomach right now. maybe taking a breath to send some comfort to the body. For me, it helps knowing that those of you who are hanging in there are still here. Remembering the love that brings us here. Big picture, I'm betting that that's the real motivator, not the fear, not the anger, but it's the love. It makes us want to do this work. Okay. So that was the things are very bad and no one is coming to save us part of the talk. And now we're going to shift. Now we get the fun reward part. We're going to shift to see how together we have our best chance to save ourselves and a large chunk of the living world. Evidence from social science research tells us that in order to have the best chance of success, we must act at all times with strict nonviolence, act to achieve a demand that's going to be popular and winnable, act over a long period of time, days, weeks, months. And this is where there's a difference here, is coming back again and again over a long period of time, despite obstacles. Act to disrupt business as usual. Won't always be popular. That for a while there, the more successful we are, the more unpopular we may be. And act in ways that involve visible personal sacrifice, including arrest and imprisonment. It's this piece of the visible personal sacrifice that communicates something on a deeper level than words. Our actions, additionally, they must be planned, coordinated, and led by a small group, 6 to 8 people. And this is in the service of being able to adapt quickly to changes, to be able to make decisions when we need to shift our plan and do something different, to be able to act in a way that's cohesive, congruent, just maximally efficient and intentional. This small group can change over waves of action, but for each wave, for each instance of a civil disobedience campaign, if you like, it needs to be the same small group. For every one person who's risking arrest, we need 10 people to do a lot of work to support them. And we've got a list of jobs, so welcome to them. Our actions must be quickly and widely communicated, right? And used as a way to bring more people into the next action. And political types call this mobilization. We keep this blend of action and outreach going for an extended period of time. In this way, we build up to the 3.5% of the population that the evidence of history tells us we need in order to radically change our carbon way of life. That's the plan. So, going to stop the screen sharing and shift over so that we can see each other now as we have this part of the talk. Good to see you all there. I'm going to, let's see. Just take a minute to see what I need to say next. So we have the plan. And following this plan, we're currently giving this talk every chance we get, at least once a week, in order to find the people who will act with us. We're building a leadership circle, and the current participants, me, Holly, and Kent, are guiding us as we get ready to move into action. At the end of March or in early April, which will be time to commit to coordinate with similar actions in the UK and in other countries, a group of at least 10 to 20 people who've had intensive training in nonviolent civil resistance will sit down in the road to block streets or other areas. We will hold banners proclaiming a popular, winnable demand. We will come back for at least 3 days and hopefully a week or more. We will publicize well and give people a clear pathway to join us. We expect that the people who participate directly in blockades will be arrested, and personal and legal support will be provided every step. As soon as they come out of jail, these people will, with support from the media team, speak widely about what they did, and this is essential. They'll be on all the local radio, news, TV programs. We can get them on all across the state. And they'll go on to talk about what they did, why they did it, and they will encourage more people to join us in the next series of actions. And then we go again and again. We're changing our model of activism a bit here. No longer seeing our actions as events, but understanding ourselves to be living in resistance to the carbon way of life all of the time. Because remember Sir David King, 3 to 5 years, and that was almost a year ago. So, we don't have time to do anything else, but all day, every day. Reminiscent of, when Nazi Germany occupied Europe and people were in resistance every day, every night. It wasn't a hobby. The model we used was developed by Roger Hallam, one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion. In part, it's based on his own research with input from other activists, and it's being applied by a growing movement of people around the world. Holly and Kent and I, in the planning over the last couple of months, have found it to be really delightful and uplifting to go to online meetings with people from many different countries. Many of them young people. A lot of the energy is coming from people in their 20s who are doing these kind of actions. In the UK, there's Insulate Britain, and now they're getting ready to move into the Stop Oil campaign. In Australia, Blockade Australia blocked off coal mine last year. In Germany, Switzerland, Italy, and in France, small groups of brave people with lots of heart have blocked motorways and gone on hunger strikes, demanding government response to the climate emergency. This past December, an XR offshoot group, Declare Emergency, sat down in the road and blocked the streets of Washington, D.C., being arrested and demanding that Joe Biden declare climate emergency. They were planning to go again recently, and there's some news that they went at least for a few days, a week or two ago. We'll try to get more up-to-date information on that group. Roger Hallam has been working with them, and hopefully they're doing well. This idea of using small actions with numbers in the tens to hundreds as a way to build momentum towards larger actions, numbering in the thousands to tens of thousands, is not a new idea. And by the way, it's a high-powered idea for times when your numbers are small and your finances are not great. the bang for your buck is really good, or it can be if it's well done. It's not a new idea. We're informed and inspired in this approach by examples from the civil rights movement of the late 1950s and the early and throughout the 60s. Landmark actions like the Montgomery bus boycott, the lunch counter sit-ins, and I have to say, the first lunch counter sit-in actually happened here in Durham on Roxborough Road. So that's where that got started. And then the Freedom Riders. They show how a small group of people can bring about major changes. Nowhere is this more beautifully seen than in the Children's March, which took place in Birmingham, Alabama in May of 1963. I'm going to take the time to tell that story, to honor those people, our teachers. Martin Luther King Jr., along with other leaders from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, came to Birmingham that spring, determined to start a major campaign to desegregate the stores in downtown Birmingham. They expected to be met with violent pushback and had chosen Birmingham for that reason, right? And that's, remember, the disruptive piece is one of the elements of what's necessary in our strategy. They were intending to be disruptive. The idea was that by putting themselves in harm's way and maintaining strict nonviolence, demonstrators would show the strength of their motivation, the sacrifice, and would at the same time expose the violence that lay just beneath Jim Crow. At first, the efforts to find people who were willing to be arrested for protesting went nowhere. The adults didn't come forward. They knew that the response to protests would be extreme from the police and from many of the white people in Birmingham. At a minimum, they would be at risk of losing their jobs. Things turned around when a popular Black disc jockey began, with the backing of some of the movement leadership, to talk to the children. He had an afternoon radio program. After school, they would all tune in and he would talk. Things moved very quickly, and on May the 2nd, children staged a mass walkout. Running out of school doors, jumping from classroom windows, and overflowing the 16th Street Baptist Church, where the protest march was to begin. After 2 days of protest, there were hundreds of arrests. Many children were arrested more than once. As expected, the response from police was extreme. Photographs of policemen setting dogs on the children were front-page news. They brought a surge of national and international support for the protesters, pressuring President Kennedy to get involved. You may have seen footage of the Birmingham police turning the fire hoses on the children. The power of the water knocked some children down, pushed them up the street. The first day the hoses were turned on, the children staggered in shock, but soon they defied the hoses, coming to protest wearing their bathing suits and taunting the police to spray them. A police officer commented that it was then that they knew they couldn't win because the people were no longer afraid. On Monday, May 10th, with many children still in jail, after over a week of civil resistance, Birmingham city leaders agreed to desegregate businesses and free all who had been jailed during the demonstration. A documentary, The Children's March, includes a moment when a group of children stands together with their arms raised, jumping up and down in the fire hose spray, saying one word again and again, And anyone who lived through those times won't be surprised to hear that that one word was the word freedom. Social science tells us that the strategy used by Gandhi in India and the civil rights movement gives us a 25 to 50% chance of winning. Not the greatest odds, we'd like better, but 25 to 50% is way better than zero. We can do this. We have a pathway. Now that you have this information, you have a choice to make. This approach to organizing does not work by persuasion. In fact, at first, these movements tend to be pretty unpopular because they disrupt people's lives. The Freedom Riders and the Lunchtown sit-in protesters were assaulted. Their own allies told them they should step back, be polite. Nonviolent civil resistance works because we're speaking the truth. Gandhi titled his autobiography, Speak Truth to Power. And the truth has power to free everyone from the lies we live by. The idea of white supremacy is a lie. The emperor has no clothes there. The lives of those of us who live with some degree of privilege are bounded by lies. The idea that we're not hurting anyone by our high carbon way of lives is a lie. Here's a little bit more statistics to ground that. According to a 2020 report from Oxfam, in 2015, the world's richest 10% were responsible for 50%. It's 1/2 of all global emissions. And before we sit back and think, well, those bad rich people, we should know that also, according to the same report, an income of $38,000 a year is enough to put someone in the world's richest 10%. It's us, y'all. The average entry-level teacher salary in North Carolina, which famously does not pay its teachers well, is over $43,000 a year. The idea that we can continue to live with the comforts of privilege indefinitely, or that our children and their children can expect such lives, is a lie. Changes are coming. Our only choice now lies in how we choose to have them come. Remember Sir David King, 3 to 5 years. The sooner we accept that our old lives are over, the faster we act to help create a kinder and a gentler transition to the new world. And finally, this idea that it's possible to get kind of hypnotized into, even when you don't believe it, I think. For me anyway, the 90s were tough. The idea that we'll find happiness through boundless consumption is a lie. There's research on that, and our lives tell us that. And when we free ourselves from that lie and stop acting like the earth is our infinite play toy, then we have a chance to learn about what really makes us happy. Before we close, I want to go back to the Black children of Birmingham in 1963. Just take a minute, let's take a minute to imagine those children. Call them back in our minds. Can you see them there in their triumph, jumping together in the spray of the fire hoses? arms raised, calling to the skies, freedom, freedom. And in that moment, no matter what happens next, they have already won, and they know it. The world is waiting for us to act in the US. They know that if we don't, then they are done for. When we free ourselves from the lies that we live by, then we're ready to act. We're asked to hear facts that are overwhelmingly horrifying and to hear them clearly enough, see them fully in our minds, know them to the depths of our hearts. And once seen, heard, seen, and known, we're asked to act on them no matter the sacrifice. All of that will be hard, repeatedly hard, but we're not alone. We will be in very good company, the company of those who came before, like the children of Birmingham, and of each other. We will not be leaving the people of the global South and the poor of the North alone to deal with catastrophe upon catastrophe without privilege to cushion the blows. We can keep those Black Lives Matter signs in our front yards, knowing we are walking our talk. We will not send our children into the future alone. After we die, hopefully someday, a long time from now, they will take the memory of us with them, fighting for them, loving them, showing them how to live in times such as these. We can give our children these memories. And all of the children are our children. By listening to this talk, you've taken the first step on a path to action to stop the climate crisis that has a 25 to 50% chance of working, better than anything else. The next step is to put your name and email address in the chat. Please do that now, and then we'll send you a list of the resources that were used in putting together the talk. And we'll also send a sign-up sheet to learn more about how you can help. Once you've sent that back, you'll be contacted about the next step to take from there. Thank you all for being here in the first place and for staying to the end for now.